Hi everybody, this is Bing Futch. Welcome to Dulcimerica. We're back after a crazy summer and early fall with a lot of things happening online virtually because of the COVID-19 coronavirus. But things are starting to change up a little bit, and I've got some brand new things to show you, and I'm looking forward to spending the next 6 weeks with you as we get into chord building, playing chords, building chords, and discovering maybe some new ones that you can use when you're playing in jams, writing music, or coming up with your own arrangements. So we're going to start off with major and minor chords, and before we get into it, I want to say hello to one of my patrons on Patreon, Annette Sheffield. Annette, thank you very much for being a patron. I appreciate you guys so much for what you do for me every single day. You make it possible, especially during these very strange times, to continue to work, to study, to research, to create new content, and to write music and perform music for all of you guys and so many other folks out there. You know, I had to cancel my entire slew of gigs and tour scheduled performances and appearances this year due to COVID, but because of my patrons, I've been able to continue working, and I am so very, very grateful to every single one of you for that. We passed some great milestones this summer, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic 2021. For those of you not familiar with Patreon, it's like a subscription service like a Hulu or Netflix or Disney Plus, but instead of it being movies and TV shows, it's artists presenting what they do. And in my case, it's music, it's video, it's tablature for mountain dulcimer, ukulele, Native American flute, music theory, and a whole much more. Just $5 a month will get you in. You'll get everything I've ever created plus exclusive weekly content. And you can also join up for an entire year and save 16%, which is 2 months free. And you'll become a part of my annual pass holder club, and I'll send you a neat magnet if you come in for a year. Just come on down here to this link, patreon.com/BingFutch. Check it out, see what's available, and do please think about becoming a patron like Annette and so many others. Again, Annette, thank you very, very much. So we're going to be kicking off 6 weeks here of studying chords, and the first thing we're going to get into are arguably the most popular chords you're ever going to run across, the major chord and the minor chord. So what do we know about chords in general? First of all, we know that major chords are usually happy, upbeat sounding chords, you know? And we know that minor chords are sometimes sad, serious, mysterious. So when it comes to telling stories with our music and bringing out a range of emotions, it's helpful to know what kind of emotions and feelings these chords raise in not only yourself, but other people. But more importantly at this point is, how do we build these chords? How do we tell the difference between them, and how do we use them when we actually start making music? So let's go ahead and take a look first of all at 3 very important things I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about notes, intervals, and chords. When we talk about a note, we're talking about one single note, and we'll also call that a pitch. A note will be the name of the note, A, B, C, D flat. Those are all notes. Pitches are those same notes, but a pitch indicates whether it's going to be high or low. For example, we'll have a D, and then we also have a D up here. It's the same note. They're both Ds, but that is a higher pitch at the 7th fret than at the open fret. So think about pitch in terms of elevation, and note is the elevator itself. Then we've got intervals. When you've got 2 notes, then you've got a relationship, a distance between one note and the other note, and we call that relationship an interval. So if you play 2 notes at once, it's not quite a chord just yet. It might be a partial chord, but it's not a fully fledged chord. What we have right there is an interval, the distance between 2 notes. By the way, I'd mentioned that if you want to start learning your intervals, there are lots of ear training applications online. One of the best ones is called Better Ears. And learning to distinguish between all the different pairs of intervals you'll run across in music theory will definitely help you when you're studying chords and getting into melodies and harmonies and things like that. Finally, when we've got 3 or more notes, but basically starting off with 3 notes, we now have a chord, also known as a triad because it has those 3 notes. So you can have chords that have more than 3 notes, and we'll talk about that later on in the series. But basically all we need are just those 3 notes. And here are the notes that we're looking at. The lowest pitched note in the chord is going to be the root. It's also known as the tonic. It's the lowest pitched note, and it's also usually the name of the chord that we're building. And that middle note, sandwiched in between the lowest pitched note and the highest pitched note, that's going to be a third. Now, depending on what type of chord we're playing, it's either going to be a major third or a minor third, but for right now, we can simply call it the third. And then at the highest pitched note in the chord is going to be the fifth, also known as the perfect fifth. So all of these chords, major and minor, are going to have these 3 things in common. It's going to have the root, it's going to have some sort of third, and then it's going to have the fifth on the top. You can sort of really picture this structure of a chord like a traffic light. The root would be the green light, the third would be the yellow light, and the fifth would be the red light. And then we can mix those up, and of course we'll get into that later on. So the difference between a major chord and a minor chord is one thing. A major chord has a root, a third, and a fifth. So let's take a look at A major. I figure most of you guys have got the 6.5 fret, and so you can do this at home so you can see the difference. A major chord is going to be 4/4, 6.5. That's going to be an L-shaped chord. The root of the chord in this case is on the bass string at the 4th fret. That's A. The third of the chord, the major third, is C sharp. That's going to be here at the 6.5 fret on the melody string. And then the fifth of the chord is going to be on the middle string at the 4th fret. That is E. That's the fifth right there. So there we have A major. Now, something you should know about your mountain dulcimer is that if you've seen a chromatic instrument, you know that all of the frets look like the 6th, 6.5, and 7th. They're fairly close together. Those are all half steps. Where we are different as mountain dulcimer players is we also have these wide open spaces mixed together with these short fret ranges. And this is where notes of our scale have been removed. So these are all whole steps. These wide spaces, these are all whole steps. And these are all half steps, these narrow spaces. 2 half steps make a whole step. If you just take that out, you can see that we've got a wide space there. So every single spot where you've got a wide space on your dulcimer is where we have had a note removed from the chromatic scale. So if I go from the 6.5 fret, what I'm doing here is I'm going to be taking that third, the major third, and I'm going to be taking it down a half step. So what was C sharp, if I take that C sharp down a half step to C natural at the 6th fret, I have now made it a minor third interval, and we're counting that interval the distance from the root of the chord. So from A to C sharp, that is a major third interval. From A to C natural is a minor third interval. By introducing that minor third in the middle of our chord, that yellow light on the traffic signal, we now have an A minor chord. The root stays the same and the fifth stays the same. The bottom and the top stay the same. The middle note is the one we alter. We bring it down a half step for a minor chord. So that's all we need to do to go from major chord to minor chord. If you've got the 1.5 fret, you can play an A major chord down here, A, C sharp, E, root, major third, perfect fifth, and you can take the major third down a half step to the 1.5 fret for C natural, and play A minor. A major, A minor. All we're changing is that yellow light of the traffic signal, that middle note in the chord. We're taking it down a half step from a major interval to a minor interval. Anytime you've got that third, that major third for a major chord, anytime you have that somewhere next to another half step, you will have the ability to change that from a major to a minor chord. We're not supposed to be able to do that on a diatonic mountain dulcimer. We're supposed to have only one instance of every note name, either major or minor. But these extra half steps give us the ability to add those extra notes and extra chords to our vocabulary, which is why a lot of people like to get them, and a lot of people also like to play chromatic. So there is a difference between a major and a minor chord. Now, that's an easy way to figure out how to build up your chords. Basically also, that 1, 3, and 5, the first, the third, and the fifth, can be looked at as far as being the first, third, and fifth notes of the associated scale. So with A major, we were just playing an A major chord. We're basically playing the first, third, and fifth notes of A major. A, that's 1, then 2, then 3 is C sharp, then 4, then 5 is E. So you can hop, skip, and jump through the notes of the scale when you're building a chord that has the same tonic or root as the scale. And that's an easy way of going about doing it. Now, how about the rest of the chords that are possible in every single key? Let's take it back to D major now, because we spend a lot of time there as mountain dulcimer players. And let's think about the D major scale. We have 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. And the notes are D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C sharp. Write all those down and then use this trick. Basically, first of all, what we're looking at are the notes of the D major scale. Now we're going to number those notes from 1 to 7. These are the scale degrees, and they're super important in music theory. Every single note gets a number all the way, 1 through 7. Now this is fun. We can build a chord off of every single note in the scale. Now, how do we know what notes go inside every single one of these chords? We use the scale and we hop, skip, and jump. Let's say we want to build a D major chord built off the first scale degree or the first note of the scale. All we have to do is start with D, then skip the next note, hop right over it, and go to the third note. Remember, we're looking for notes 1, 3, and 5 of the associated scale. So that third note is going to be F sharp. Skip the next note and go to the next one and add that. That's going to be A. So D, F sharp, and A are the ingredients for a D major chord. Now it's as simple as that, and without having to think about different scales and all that, all you have to do is start on any letter, then with that as your root, skip over the next letter and add the one after it, then skip over the next letter and add the one after that. If you do this, you will build off of the first, fourth, and fifth notes of the scale 3 major chords. If you do this with the second, third, and sixth notes of the scale, you'll get 3 minor chords. And if you do this off of the 7th note of the scale, and this goes for any key, you'll end up with what's called a diminished chord. A diminished chord is basically a minor chord where that 5th is brought down a half step as well. So it's a root, a minor third, that's a major third brought down a half step, and then the 5th is brought down or diminished a half step, and that gives us a diminished chord. And for us, in the key of D, that's C sharp diminished. It sounds like this, or like this. And even though it sounds kind of weird, it does have very, very powerful properties that we'll be looking at in our next episode. So we have 3 major chords, we have 3 minor chords, and we've got 1 diminished chord in every single key, whether we're playing in a major key or a minor key. They may happen in different orders, but we still have those 7 chords to work with. So when you're playing in any key, it's always a good idea to know what those chords are and where to find them all over the fretboard. Now here's some other magic. And as soon as we figure out how to build those 7 chords, now we want to use them somehow, whether we're playing fiddle tunes or whether we're writing a piece of music or whether we're arranging a piece of music. How do these chords like to move? Is there a certain pattern involved? Is there a certain formula? And as a matter of fact, there is. When we're moving chords around, we might be thinking in terms of the root of the chord. We're going to move a D chord to a G major, move a G major to an A major. And all we're thinking about initially is that one note. But remember that inside of every chord, there are 3 notes, and their relationships to each other will change as we go from chord to chord. And there is a sort of, not really a hierarchy, but there is a sort of accepted way to move these chords in what's called a chord progression, so that these notes move and have an accent with these other relationships with other chords. Let me give you an example of that. We talked about our scale degrees, and those numbers down below the scales, what can also refer to the chords that we're playing. So you've probably heard of a 1-4-5 chord progression. That means we're going to be using chords built off the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale. We now know, of course, that that's going to be all 3 of our major chords. So for D major, that's going to be D, G major, and A major. Now, can you just mix those up in any way you want to? Of course you can. The most important thing here is where our root is, D, and our 5 chord A, because this is a very, very, very powerful relationship. The 1 chord loves to go to the 5 chord, and the 5 chord likes to resolve back to the 1 chord. It just sounds very final. It's a great way to end a musical sentence. Boom, drop the microphone, right? That's all you need. Some chords have a sort of resolution like that, but other chords kind of leave you hanging. There's a bit of tension, there's a bit of restlessness where something else needs to be said. And that would be the 4 chord. The 4 chord, you can go from the 1 to the 4 very easily, but just stopping there and trying to go back home to the 1 chord doesn't have the same sense of finality that the 1 to the 5 does. D to G major and back again. See, doesn't that sort of say that there's something else that needs to be said there? If you go from G back to D, it is a nice resolution. In fact, you may recognize that as being, well, what some people call the amen cadence to end a tune, going from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. Amen. But it's definitely not as final a resolution as the 5 chord to the 1 chord. There's something very, very, very strong about finishing that way. But if you mix the 4 together with the 5 and the 1, you get a lot of very interesting things. Let's do 1, 4, then go back to 1, and then go to 5 and back to 1. That works out very nicely. It's a nice balance. Well, you know, the 1-4-5 chord progression is used by so many people all around the world. It is definitely the world's most popular chord progression and has been for thousands of years. So there aren't a whole bunch of variations you can do with those 3 chords, but you can change things up by going 1 to the 5, then down to the 4, and back to the 1. Sounds a little bit different like this. That's kind of cool. That sets you up for another pass around, possibly. So it's very, very easy to work with the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord to create all kinds of happy music, because those are the naturally occurring major chords that we're going to have in every single key. Well, how about the minor now? The minor brings in a different feeling. So if you were strategically trying to write something that is shamefully manipulative, you want to get people feeling happy and up, and then you want to pull the rug out from under them with a bit of sadness, minor chords are the way to go. So how do you throw these in here? That's where it gets a little bit more complicated, and for that I want to show you this neat handy dandy guide to voice leading that I'm going to put up here on the screen. Once again, we talked about how we're not just moving one note when we move a chord, we're moving 3 different chords, or 3 different notes rather. And those notes all have relationships that create tension and release in music, and that's part of the beauty that we hear, the complexity that we hear in a lot of different tunes. Now, any chord will go to any chord, but sometimes the relationships between those notes inside the chords don't yield all the great results. There is sort of a pattern that you can follow of options that will give you really striking changes. And this chord chart right here is going to show you how to do that. The first thing you'll notice is that we've got a series of colored rectangles or columns. Don't mind all the scary terms that you see written across them. Those will become important to you later, hopefully on as you continue to study music theory. The most important thing to know here is that the root is going to be on the far right side, and we're going to be moving across to the left. The idea here is to get the most satisfying movements between chords is to always move to the adjacent column. So going from 1 to the column that has 7 and 5 in it, and then back to 1 is going to be great. So what's helpful for this exercise is if you already write down what each of these chords are going to be. 1 is going to be D major, 5 is going to be A, 7 is going to be C sharp diminished, 2 is going to be E minor, 4 is going to be G, 6 is going to be B minor, and 3 is going to be F sharp minor, and those are everything that we need right there. So we move from the far right and we move to this column. So let's do 1 to 5 and then back to 1 again. We've already done that. Let's do 1 to 7, back to 1 again. Very, very final, good stuff. Now let's continue our journey past that second column from the right and add in our blue column. And I've got a couple of choices there. I think I'm going to go for the 4, since we've already been working with G major. Let's go ahead and do that. Starting from 1, there's our 1 chord D, going to 5, and now it's bringing a G at the 4 chord. That's very nice. We can go back to 5, and then to 1. So we're not hopping and skipping across columns, even though you can if you want to. This is going to make it very easy to create pleasing chord progressions. This chart wraps around, and I might add that when you're doing your hopping, skipping, and jumping with the scales, that chart also wraps around when you're doing that work. So let's do this now. I'm going to add the E minor this time instead of the G major. I'm going to add the 2 chord. Coming from 1, here's our 5. That's very nice and dramatic, isn't it? And then we can bounce back to say 7 to 1. Let's push even further. Let's go out to the gray column from 1. I'll take that E minor again. Now B minor. Wow, that's some really cool stuff, isn't it? Now, this is not necessarily depressing or sad. It just could be a different feel. It's a conflict between the happiness of the major chords and what's happening with the minor chords. So there we have B minor, which we could then come back by way of the G chord, and then our 7 chord, and our 1 chord. And let me do that again just to show you how you can chart your way across this whole thing. Going from 1, D major, to A5, 2 with our E minor, 6 with our B minor. I'm going to come back to G, 4 chord, come back to 7 now. So I've taken the other option on the blue and the green column and back to the tonic. Oh heck, let's go all the way to the end of the column. And this time, I'm going to wrap around and we're going to leave the white column 3 and come back to 1, which would be on the other side. Here we go. 1. Now see, that 3 going back to 1 is not nearly as final as the 5. It's not as final as the 7 going back to 1. So it actually is better to go from right to left on this chart and then just come back from left to right. So if we're going from right to left and then from left to right, let's hit that 3 and then make our way back across all of the columns. And after all those chords, we find our way back home. One of the things that can happen very quickly if you don't have some sort of a plan in mind, especially where plan is involving harmony and consonance and planned dissonance, tension and release, is you can paint yourself into a corner just by choosing chords willy-nilly and not knowing how those ingredients inside each chord are going to react to one another, whether they're going to be great resolution chords or whether they're going to set up even more tension. And understanding what's happening inside of the chords is key to getting really nice flowing chord progressions. Now we said that it's better in this case to go from the right to the left, but that's not saying that we can't start with the root and kick immediately in a wraparound to the right and hit 3 to start our journey. Let's do that. Out of these, I'm going to choose 2. Well, that was very much close to I Can't Help Falling in Love with You by Elvis Presley. So you can go the other direction as well. Now, can you hop, skip, and jump across these columns? Absolutely, of course you can. But once again, it's knowing that if you're not getting that feeling that you're looking for, that sound you're looking for, when all else fails, if you find yourself stuck at a column, just go one direction, to the left or to the right. One column, one space, and you're going to find yourself back in a happy place. And once you have this number sequence and the column sequence up in your head, it shouldn't be any problem then to do this sort of thing on the fly. So let me go ahead and hop and skip and jump. Starting with 1, I'm going to hop over that 7-5 column and go right to 2 and 4. I'm just going to kind of hop around, and when things start getting ugly, not necessarily ugly, but unmanageable, then I'm going to go ahead and go next door to get some resolution. So here we go, from 1, going to 2. It's not very exciting. 3. It's just kind of going up. There's nothing really exciting happening here. Going back to 2. 5. That's nice. Now I'm going to 3. That's interesting, but it still has more to say. It's restless. It wants to do something else. So let's go to 6. Let's go to 7. Not as connected as I would have liked it to have been. So let me back it up to 4. Now I'm going to come to 6. Nice downward movement. Now I'll hit the 3. Now I'm going to skip over that 6 and go back to the G. That's not too bad. That's leading me home. I'm going to head that 7 and then back to home, back to the tonic. So there's an illustration on how you can use this voice leading chart, kind of get it memorized up in your head, and this will work with any key that you're playing in. And again, all rules were made to be broken. So if you feel like hopping and skipping around, you're going to find a lot of opportunity there for combinations of notes that are going to sound good to you. And that is the bottom line. Not what somebody else tells you is going to sound good, but if it sounds good to you. But I think this chart will help you with the flow of chord progressions until you get an idea of how you can start doing some other things to make for interesting music. Now, majors and minors are just the tip of the iceberg. We have 10, count them, 10 chords we're going to work with that you can put into things. Now, as soon as you start introducing these other types of chords, things get very, very interesting very quickly, and this chart is going to help you quite a bit. So please take a look at it, work with it a little bit over this next week or so, and when we come back next week, we'll be taking a look at just a little something you can do, especially with you people that have the 6.5 fret and the 1.5 fret, that are going to add a little bit of extra color to your playing. Again, everybody, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.